Meteor scatter for beginners. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is how meteor scattering works, a little bit of the physics, some of the maths behind it, so you see why 6 meters is a good band to try and use, and then hopefully how easy it is to get started. I will say now, before we get into it, this is not a band for rag chewing on meteor scat. If you think, you know, JT65 in the past was awful because it was so slow, this is even worse at times. Right, let's get started. So first thing, let's talk a little bit about terminology. The ones on the right, on the left there, sorry, the two that are, the meteor, people get confused with what a meteor is. So meteor is basically a rock that comes in to the Earth's atmosphere and burns up. A meteorite is one that comes into the Earth's atmosphere, doesn't normally burn up, doesn't normally give us a trail, but actually ends up on the ground. These ones tend to be very microscopic. If they're in space, they're called asteroids and meteorites. Bit of terminology, people get these two muddled up. So, if you look at what happens with meteors, and I should have probably put meteorites up there as well, the Earth is continually bombarded by these all the time. They are normally in the range 0.1 of a gram to 1 gram. That's smaller than a grain of sand. It's about 25 million on a daily basis. If you want to get some meteorites, when you're cleaning your guttering out, you know that black gunge you get? Take that and run a magnet through it. And if you feel on the magnet, you'll feel a very little bit of grainy stuff that sticks to the magnet. That's the meteorites. If you've got a microscope, then you can actually see they're actually pear-shaped and circular. They come in from all directions. The speeds are horrendous. 260,000 kilometers per hour, or 72 kilometers per second, so they're really fast. They're not really predictable, but at certain times of the year, there are meteor showers, which are basically comets that have broken up and the Earth's orbit is going. These are the ones that have got the biggest maximum hourly rate of the peak showers. Now, they actually categorise as to which constellation they come from. So if you're an astronomer, the Geminis come out from the Gemini constellation. So that's the naming of them. But the key thing to note is, if you really want to make sure of catching one, December the 14th is a good date, 21st of December is a good date, and 4th of January in the evening. I'll go into a little bit of detail in a minute, what's the best time to look for them. Right, let's get into some of the physics and some of the right words. So basically what happens is, when a meteor hits the Earth's atmosphere, it's going so fast and has so much energy, it hits the atmosphere, the atoms break up into protons and ions. So you get an ion stream. Those ion streams are probably about 1 meter wide, going up from 1 meter wide, and they're probably 25, 30, 40 kilometers long. These meteor trails, these ionized particle trails, actually reflect the radio waves. The meteors that cause them range from basically 11 to 72 kilometers per second. And I'll tell you in a minute why there's a difference in the speed. The density of the trail depends on the kinetic energy, the energy. And all schoolboy physics, you can all remember this from physics. The kinetic energy is mass times volume, velocity squared over 2. So that basically means that as the speed increases, you don't get a nice gradual increase, you get a nice curve. So anything up here is good news because it's very high energy, high speed. But as you drop off, the actual energy doesn't go off linearly, it goes off on a slight curve. So the faster they're going, the better for you. And just to put this into perspective, if you're driving your Tesla, your 2-ton Tesla down the motorway at 110 miles an hour, 100 ton, you're probably about 1,000 times less energy than some of these. They're really, really high-powered energy. Right, some more maths. So the important thing from a radio point of view is how long the trail lasts and how reflective it is. Okay, the two important things. So the trail duration, we'll call it the ping because we're reflecting the radio waves of it, is inversely proportional to the square of the frequency. Right. So what that means is, if you look at the the duration, when you're down here, you get quite a nice long duration. As you come up here, it very quickly tails off. So if you look at the thirds of the reduction, so if you go between 2 metres and 70 centimetres, there's a 9-to-1 reduction. Well, it's actually between 8 and 9, I've just rounded this off. So that's quite a big reduction in the time. So if you had a 9-second reflection on 2 metres, you'd only get 1 second on 70 centimetres. The next problem is actually when you look at the signal strength, it's proportional to the inverse cube of the frequency. So what that means is it drops off very rapidly again. So the difference between 2 and 70 sems is basically 15 dBs. So the signal strength is whopping off all the time. If you look at it 6 metres versus 2 metres, signal strength is reduced by a factor of 24. So what this says is that actually 6 metres is a good band for meteor scatter. If you go up to 2 metres, everything gets much harder because basically the duration's gone down and the strength of the signal getting back has gone down as well. There is some meteor scatter activity on 10 metres. I'm not really sure how much there is. I know that during the last November, during the shower event, there was a little bit of activity. I was trying to hear it, but I didn't actually hear any of it. But there is some on 10, and that ought to be slightly better again. This is, can you see all that? See that? It's basically 2 charts of the signal strength of 2 metres versus 77 ping. This is 2 Australian amateurs. They were using Fsk441, which I'll talk about in a minute, to actually communicate. They were trying to do a contact on 2 metres and 70 sems using meteor scatter over a path of 1,200 kilometres. They actually succeeded, but you see at the top here, these are seconds at the top here, this scale. You see at the top here, the 70 sems ping is really quite small. The 2 metre one is quite long. I'm actually not convinced this is 1 meteor, by the way. I think when you get down here, this is another one coming in. But I think this part up here is definitely one, but you can see the difference. Right, let's talk about some of the geometry. So basically it's as simple as you have a meteor trail in the sky, you send a radio signal, goes up to it, it hits it, bounces off at right angles, and comes down the other side. The simple geometry. There is lots of different geometries here. You can come off this, bounce back and come backwards, do backscatter. You can come tighter. You can even get, if there's other meteors up here, you can even go bong, bong, bong and down over here. Very rare, but if you get that to happen, you should fill your lottery numbers in. Because it's, you know, a unique event normally. So the range is approximately 50 kilometres, sorry, 500 kilometres to 2,000 kilometres. If this is very similar to aeroplane scatter, but the aeroplane is down here somewhere, and you can see with that geometry that the range is much less, so it's sort of 200-300 kilometres. Now these trails, this is the most unimaginative piece of categorisation you can ever have. They call the trails overdense or underdense, depending upon how many ions are on. So the overdense, these are the trails that we as rodeo amateurs like, because basically they're nice and strong, there's lots of ionisation up here, and they reflect the signal nicely for us. The underdense ones, these ones are not have enough ionisation up here to actually reflect the signal, they tend to scatter it. So these ones were used in the 60s, 70s for actually commercial systems. These are the ones that we use as radio amateurs. This is very much, you probably noticed, this is very much like sporadic heat. The only difference is not the sun that's ionising it, it's this meteors coming in and doing it. Right. Off to the side a little bit, if you just want to hear meteors, like not on the amateur band, there's 2 ways you can actually do this. The French have a Graves radar system, which is an over-the-horizon space radar. It's in Dijon in France, and it shoots out down over the south of France. If you tune to this 143.050, or if it's SSB, go down okay, and point your arrow southeast, you can actually hear meteor pings when they're around. You won't hear them all the time, you might need to listen for depending on what time of year, quite a long time, but you can actually hear them. If you run WSJT or in the MSK144 mode, and the waterfall, you'll actually see the pings on that. As you don't, that's set to 30 seconds. The other one is that in Belgium, there's a Meteor detection system that the Belgians run. It runs on a frequency of 49.97. You can actually hear that as well in the UK if the antenna's pointing east. This one, because it's for Belgium, there's receiving stations in Belgium, so it's a little bit more tricky to hear. This thing's blasting out, you can hear it. If the International Space Station's going out and the geometry's right for reflections, you can hear that going over. And some people believe they've heard aeroplanes, and when what's his name, SpaceX fire their rockets over this way, they can actually hear those as well. But it's just by the side. It's not on the amateur bands, it's below the amateur band, so your aerial should just work on that one. So let's talk a little bit about the history. It was probably first detected that radio waves were reflected from meteors when, particularly in World War II, when they were trying to track V2s by radar. They actually had reflections then which they initially thought could be V2s, but they actually turned out, they worked out they were actually meteors coming in. So it goes back quite a long way into the 40s. Prior to 2001, the ham operators used high-speed CW, only 800 words per minute. What they basically used to do, send it out very fast. So the receiver edge would have a tape recorder running initially, and then a PC. Record it, then slow it right down, decode it, then send one back, speed another one back up, and send it back out again. So it really was quite difficult, quite time consuming, and I should think quite tricky to actually do. Occasionally, SSV contacts were made during meteor showers. There's some anecdotal evidence which says that some of them, when the showers are very heavy, people have actually talked about it being like sporadically happening.
I have heard the first part of the YU call sign on SSB on 2 meters many years ago. Just YU gone.
Yeah. I've not actually heard, I've listened on 2 meters trying to find this, but I think everybody's been on the data modes doing it, not SSB. So as I said, first military networks were actually in Canada in the 50s. They actually had a meter scatter system across Canada. That you worked on the underdense meter trails. That was primarily working on the scattering effect of the meter trail. So it's very highly sensitive, a lot of power. It basically worked on the system of one station was sending out, "Are you there?" The other station came back and said yes, and they said, "Here's a message," and whack one over to it. So that type of approach. NATO in the mid to late 60s and into the 70s had a major scat network across Europe. As soon as geostationary satellites came into place, these just basically disappeared. Because this one, even at its peak, was only doing about a 4K C slot. So it was very low bandwidth. And then in 2001, Joe Taylor and his crew came along and gave us Fsk441, which is basically a digital way of actually doing meter scan. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a minute. But that meant that basically, as long as you've got a PC and a radio that you can interface to, basically anybody could go do it. It was very easy, relatively easy to do. That software is now unsupported by the Joe Taylor crew, and MSK144 is actually the one that's in use. In Europe, we still use these ones to some level, because I think the competitions insist we use them, not the MSK144. Is there any questions so far? Alright, what is Fsk441? So this was the original one by the Joe Taylor guys. It's multi-shift keying, it's basically 4 tones. It's basically the approach is code it, whack it out as fast as you can, as many times as you can in a 15 or 30 second time slot. Then listen, the other station then is listening. It can pick up very small pings, these small pings which are probably a few seconds or less than a few seconds, decodes it. Because the message is in there so many times, you've got a good chance of decoding it. It was, there's no error correction, there's basically no synchronization. It has special tones, some of these messages. So that means that one tone means 73, or these ones where it's got R26 and R27, I'll show you in a minute what they mean, but they're basically signal strength ports. It's still liked by the Europeans because partially, so basically for Fsk441, the message one message is about 40 milliseconds, right? And MSK144 is 72 milliseconds. And the view from Europe is that basically because this is a shorter message length, and the satellite you can actually get away with shorter pins, and that means you can decode it. The other thing this does, which the error correction ones don't do, is you can decode 2 or 3 characters and then move on. The error correction ones, you have to basically get a whole big message sequence to do it. So it appears to have a number of advantages. However, because the JT crew don't support it anymore, it's in one of the older versions of WSJT. So I'm thinking JSW10, I think it is. It might even be just JSWT by itself. If you use that, it's tricky with interfacing into your radio because it hasn't got the latest stuff into it. I think that was probably 2010. That's where this came from. On the other hand, there is this called MSHV, which is what the Europeans, and this is basically, there's a guy, Christian, who's basically takes the engines that Joe Taylor's crew put together and make available on the web, puts a wrap around it, and comes up with a new looking program. This has got basically everything in it, and I'll show you that in a minute. This guy Christian, he's very clever. He's done a very good job at producing MSHV, but he doesn't get on with the Joe Taylor crews. He's got a track record of, I think, violating, they would say, their licensing. So he picks up software that he's not supposed to use because they haven't released it, and puts it into the public domain. So what do they use basically today? Today is MSK144. So this is FT8 on steroids. Basically, what this is, all it basically does is it takes the same message function, 77 bits, puts error correction, forward error correction, that into it, 144-bit message, whaps it out in 72 milliseconds. So in a 15-second slot, that's quite a lot of time, so 200 odd, right? Baud rate is 250, frame duration is that. Uses the full SSB bandwidth. So it's basically using FT8 over a slightly different way. It's FT8 on steroids is the way to look at it. All the messaging, everything else is exactly the same. That's why I'm going to show you, it's so easy to do this in a minute. The other modes, so I've included these because these are the other two that are used in UK ACs. JT6M was originally optimised for 6 meter scatter. It's an improvement on Fsk441. It's a later version. It's got some sync tones. It sends a sync tone every 3rd character, so it's quite slow. Doesn't have any forward error correction, and like I said, it's an enhanced version of Fsk441. It's claimed to be more sensitive, right? But the other things about this one is it's actually very good at tropo scatter, weak ES scatter, and any of the other scatter modes that are around. Because when I actually looked up scatter modes, I couldn't believe how many different categorizations there are for them. There's not just 2 or 3, there's a list of about 20 odd. It's used, you will see it in the UK ACs on 6 meters. There's probably, the last time I looked at it, there's probably about 40 or 50 contacts made across the so not too many. ISOCAT A and B, 2 versions of that. The A is half the speed of the B. Again, freeform characters, similar type 42 tones, no error correction. There was a lot of fuss when Joe Taylor's took this out of the WSJT because it was used in Europe for a lot of outbound scatter. It seems to work better on 2 meters than this one. I'll show you, I'll just give you a quick look at these because they're really very similar to Fsk441. Right, so let's talk about what you need from the station. So on 6 metres, probably a three element Yagi pointing east. You don't need a rotator because basically, as I said to you, the geometry is wherever the trail is. So it could be, well, it just pointed basically east. A simple wire dipole does work. Right, I've had contacts with people with simple wires.
Why east?
Well, because the reason it's east is because if you're in the UK, in the range you're talking about, 500 to 2,000 kilometres, you point east, because if you point the other way, there's nothing. It's as simple as that. And if you point east, you basically, I have a 5 element, I regularly point east, and I light up people in Norway, Finland, and down into Italy, in the Baltic states, and up across Poland, and up there. So it's that sort of band again. You just need 6 meters. You just need a transceiver with 6 meters on it. Probably need a bit of power. 100 watts is good. I don't know that it works on 3 or 4 watts. I think you need sort of somewhere between 30 upwards, and you just need one of these softwares installed.
Is it horizontally polarized beams?
Yes, but I think white sticks work, because I believe I've had a contact with a guy in Poland on a white stick.
So that would suggest vertical might as well.
It might as well, yeah. So I put a question mark against it. I don't know. All I know is I had a contact with one, and I normally look them up on QRZ. And he said his equipment, he said he was using a white stick for 6 meters. Now, whether he was or wasn't, I don't know. But I've also seen some documentation elsewhere which says this might work. So if you've got a white stick and haven't got a dipole, it's just a question of, you can leave it running overnight, look at the PSK reporter in the morning and just see if you've received anybody. If you've received them, the chances are they will hear you.
That's relative to power each end, no?
It is relative to power, but I mean, there's a pretty fair bet that there's people out there doing this with 100 watts.
The path losses are phenomenal.
No. Because the signal you get back is quite strong. I mean, you're talking about in the 2s and 3s and 4s dBs on plus 2s and 3s and 4s on the software. So they're quite strong. Some of them are very good. 2 meters. That's the standard recommendation. I've tried 2 meters. I can light up. I've only got 50 watts. I have got a 12 element, which is a plus 12 element, which I'm using. I can light up stations in Italy, Poland, all the way up there, and I get a few responses, but not too many. It's much more difficult, and I don't know whether that's because I'm only using 50 watts of power, or basically it's because it's just all too much more difficult. But I have had MSK144s on 2 meters, and it works, but it's much more difficult. So operating. So this is really simple. If you've got FT8 working on 6 meters, you've got the top, you change the mode to Fsk441, make sure your arrow's pointing east, hit the button, go, and off you go. It's as simple as, it's no more difficult than that. The call-in frequency is 5280. That's not as per the band plan. The band plan is up, it's got it up in the 300s. Everybody seems to ignore that. Don't ask me why. This is historically the frequency. They brought the new band plan out, and I don't think anybody's bothered to move. You use MSK144. The exchanges are exactly as FT8, so you don't need to learn anything else, exactly the same. You use a 15-second slot. These next two are what is supposed to be how you operate, exactly the same as if you would do on FT8. If you're beaming west, through west, south through west to north, you should be beaming you should be using the first period. If you're beaming south through east to north, you should be on the second period. I'm not sure how many people obey that anymore. I think most people don't. The Dutch, for example, will all use slot 2. They go out on the slot 2 all the time, whichever direction they're going. I find this doesn't work for me because when I get one of the strong stations down south of me, it's blasting me out. So I just go which is ever usable in my location. RSTs. The easiest way is just allow the software to address it. Don't get too excited about it, just leave the software to address it. You can also just send R26. If you remember on 26, you remember on the Fsk441, I said one of the messages was one time was 26 and 27. That's that. This table here is how you work out the signal strength. This is the official one. So if your burst is up to 0.5 of a second, you give them a 2. If it's between 0.5 to 1, you give them a 3. 4 from 1 to 1 to 5 seconds. If it's not 5, if it's longer than 5. Right? If you want to work it out. And then these are the signal strengths. So if it's 6, if it's below S2, S3, S5, all the way up. So if you look, 2.6 would be a burst of up to half a second and an S2. I don't think anybody uses that anymore. The only things I get are basically what the software's telling me. And then if I am trying to use Fsk441, I just put 26 in. Now the way that this works, and I'll show you how to do this in a minute, but it's very, very, very easy, is that the 50.280 is the calling channel. So exactly the same as on VHF. You call if somebody will answer you on another channel, on your channel you're going to do the traffic on. So basically what the software does is it calls CQ on this frequency. As soon as somebody answers, no, but let's just explain that another way. The way to explain this is that you basically set the frequency up around where this stays. So you set your receiver up to say 280, 285, 290. So if you say 290, you then set it up to transmit on 280. So it transmits on 280 as CQ. Somebody replies back to you on 290 because you told him to do that, and then your software just switches to 290 and has the call. And when it finishes, it drops back to CQ again on 280. You don't need to worry about this. The software just takes control of all of that.
You set the red marker for your transmit to 280.
Yes.
And then your receive green one is 290. Yeah.
But the software just does all that for you. I've said allowed 30 minutes for QSO. Some of these go through incredibly quickly, within a couple of 3 minutes. Some of them take 45 minutes to go through. So like I said, this is not a rag chewing mode. This is a mode for, perhaps when you're doing something else. The other thing to do is run PSK reporter, so you're monitoring what your signal's doing, because that gives you a degree of confidence that you're getting out. You can also see what the activity is as well. On 2 meters, it's basically the same. All this is all the same. This is the channel they probably use. But this is the channel. Sorry, this is the channel you use for MSK144. You should move off it as well. Now, it's worth saying, if it's very quiet, it's outside of a shower, you'll find a lot of people won't bother to move off the calling channel. They just can have the conversation on the calling channel. And I think that seems to be generally accepted, because even the big stations that complain there's too much traffic and people aren't moving, when it's quiet, are using it and not moving off it. So I think that's generally accepted. If you see 4 or 5 calls coming in, then you should probably use it as a calling channel. So for 2 meters, it's 14360 at MSK144. The little trick to know is if you're not sure of what frequency to use, if you go into PSK Reporter and click on the monitors on the band you think, and then click on those stations, you'll actually see what frequency they're on. So you know what the frequency is, and that's on MSK144 you'll see it's normally 360. However, Fsk441 is still used, and it's probably and that's normally used around 14370. But it tends to be people that are setting up calls to one another and setting up DX calls. So really, you need to just keep an eye on ON4KT. That will give you an indication. That will show you if anybody's securing in your direction. and on 2 meters, 30-second slots are used because it's more difficult because what we've shown you previously, than taking 30 seconds. Now in Europe, Americans love MSK144. They lose it. It's been used a lot in the US. Actually, very little of this. In Europe, there's a band of people that think this one is better, Fsk441. And the reason they think that is they think it's slightly more sensitive, and also because it hasn't got the error correction, you get the partial decodes. So the view is that if you get enough partial decodes, you could decode a message quicker than you can on MSK144.
So we never talk to the Americans.
Sorry? Well, you can't anyway because this isn't. But if you look at the information that's been published in the public domain, it's pretty clear that MSK144 is better. It's just that there is this European thing, particularly some of the Italians. I mean, I've had an Italian call me on OM4KT and say, stop using MSK144, talk to me on that because it's insensitive, talk to me on FSK441. So, yeah.
Obviously, FSK441 must be a lot louder than if the Italians were filming.
Anyway, so that's basically operating. Look, it's very simple, up to 2 meters. So what I'm going to do now is just show you WSJT stroke X very quickly, and then give you a bit longer view of MSHV. Yeah? So it's probably not many of you have seen that. So this is basically so this is basically MSJT stroke X. You seem to love this. Basically what you do to get MSK144 is you got the top here, that's the mode. And basically you can see it's in there, yeah? Now like I say, when I said to you, this is basically the modes that Joe Taylor crew supports today. So the top one is FST4, that's a low frequency one. Then you've got the ones we love, FT4, FT8. JT4 is another slow one for HF. JT9 is an interesting one, it's got some slow modes, but it also has got the JT9 stroke H. It's a fast mode that you could use for satellite, sorry, Meteor scatter, but I don't think anybody does. JT65 you all know, dead slow. The new one, Q65, which is EME, and scattering, particularly at the very high frequencies. You've got the MSK144, which is Meteor scatter, and then this is a sort of a whisper type protocol. And then echo is if you want to bounce signals off the moon, you can see your own signal coming back. So all you do is select 144. Select 144. You can see that the messages format is very similar to what you would have seen on FT8. You set the frequency, that's 380, isn't it? Just bring that down. There we go. Let's get it right. Basically select the frequency there, press the button and off you go. To get it to do the calling channel, you see there's a little down here, there's a little box, TXCQ280, right? Basically, you click that, move your frequency where you want to go on your radio. Right, when you transmit, God, I hope this works. Yeah, it's gone 280. That's all we've got to do. And then when you answer somebody here, because you notice there's no auto sequencing here, you have to actually click on one of these. When you click on one of these, this slips back and transmits on 295. So that's it. Okay, it could be easier. Yeah, any questions?
There is an auto sequence box there.
Oh, there is actually. Sorry, there is. Yes, you can auto sequence. Sorry, you can. Yeah. I don't use this too often. I use the other one. But sorry, this is an auto sequence box. My mistake. That's it really. And then
So when you go into that, it actually sets it on 380, but you're saying that's wrong.
that's wrong. I know what I've done. That's an American. And you've got the American frequencies, and I haven't been into and changed the frequencies. So for Europe, it's got absolutely is 280. You do need to, when you install this, if you are going to use these modes, you do need to check the frequencies are right, because they've got the American ones in them as well. I think some of the FT8 ones and FT4 ones are wrong on VHF. Is there any questions on that? Let me just show you.
That 295 you chose, I presume you in the same as FT8 you just pick on
Yeah,
the band map, you just pick a quiet spot,
It's
or is it quiet everywhere?
Well, it's quiet everywhere.
Yeah.
So you can sit on the frequency that you've got to use for your traffic channel. You can sit on that and you can listen for 5 minutes. There might not be any scattering or any meteors. There might be in the next 5 minutes. There might be 3 or 4. So I mean, all I do is I find a quiet spot and use it. And then if I do see somebody else using it, I might move. But basically, I just find a quiet spot where I haven't got any birdies or the interference is low. And there's just nothing I can do. I try and stay within, not too far away from the 280. So I don't go like down to 150 or anything like that. I stay down maybe between 260 and 290. Something like that.
You're obviously a very patient person.
Like I said, not a rag chewing man. This is eminently worse than JT65. You can sit there for 2 hours and not get anything, and then you might get 2 contacts or 3 contacts within 30 minutes. I mean, when the last shower was on, I had, at the start of it, I had, I think 2 evenings, about 6 hours, got nothing. And then the next evening I did it and I had, I think, 15 in the evening. You just can't tell. What are we doing now? Here we go.
So it is very hard on your transceiver then.
It's no worse than FT8.
No, but on FT8 you could be making 10, 20 contacts in an hour, whereas...
Well, the way I use FT8, I'm basically every 15 seconds it's transmitted. So,
Yeah,
so it's
but if you do that for 2 hours at 50 watts or 100 watts,
well, just
your transceiver will get very warm.
don't buy one off me because I do that regularly. I mean, mine just sits there for. I mean, if it's a RITI competition, for example, I mean it's probably 7 or 8 hours continuously just banging out 50% of the time, 50% cycle time. So this is basically MSHV. MS is Meteor Scat and HV is the guy's call sign. It's LZ4HV. His name's Christoph, but when you actually look at it, it starts with an H. It's just the Englicisation of it. It's very similar to, in some ways it's very similar. The Europeans like this approach. It's basically, so let's put it onto let me show you why it's light. So that's basically why it's light, because basically when you look up here, you've got basically everything. All the protocols, all the old ones. So whereas if you're using WSJT/X, you really haven't got a choice of what you can use. You've got, if you want to do Meteor scat, you can use MSK144, Fsk441. Another version of 315, which is just a slow version of that. You've got the ISOCAT in there. You've got the JT6M, and you've got basically the ones that we know, FT4, FT8, Q65, and then some of the 65. And this one is a beacon mode. It's used on beacons. So basically, this program has all of the JT plus a few extra ones, protocols going all the way back, which is why the Europeans like it. If I just slick on, I'll show you FT8 in a minute. So basically what you have is, so this is set up now for MSK144. These two, this is the received slot you're getting, the current received slot goes in there. The previous received slot appears in here when it's gone through. I'll show you that in a minute. This is basically all the messages that come in decode. This is the ones that are basically for me. So this is like, you know, if I see Q something, they answer, those messages appear here. This is very similar to WSJT. You've seen all that before. This is a little bit specialised in for the MSK144. So let's just quickly talk about this box here. We see tone tolerance. Basically, when the radio signals get reflected off the Meteor trails, they get a bit of Doppler on them. And what this box allows you to do is set the tolerance of where you're going to go look for a tone. So currently I'm looking for the tone between 1100 and 1900. I could drop that down. I might as well better do that. Drop that down. So I can drop it down to lower numbers. So I'm only looking there, what is it, 1350 to 1650. The Doppler I see doesn't go anywhere near these numbers, it's sort of 40, 50 at the most. This also takes into account, if anybody's slightly off frequency, it takes that into account. You could put in your TX report in here. This is the slot that you're using, 15 seconds. As well, 6 meters would use 15 seconds. Auto sequence button. This is the button to set up the calling channel, then move into a traffic channel. These ones are basically first and second period. This basically stops the decode during the transmit cycle, and then you've basically got the messages as previously. So let me just show you what a can't see that, can you? See it now? Yep. So this is basically a decode of a guides I'd worked in Sweden, let's say Sweden. You can see the message up here, and then the rest of it is just general noise. I have quite a high noise level. I've got some sort of pulsating. You can see every second or so I've got a pulse coming in. I've no idea what it is. During the daytime it's 9 plus 10. It's directional. I talked to the guy at the RSGB and he told me it was a switch I had power supply somewhere. But I mean, the direction it's going in is about 40, 50 metres away from my area. That's a hell of a power supply. So anyway, that's basically what you see. You see a little bit of a message up there. Do you want to hear one of them? See if we can hear them. Hear it?
Is that a sign?
Crunch on it, yeah.
That was lightning, that wasn't the crunch.
That is literally all you hear. That's why I say it's very difficult to know if anybody's working on a channel, because that was a pretty good signal.
Do they all sound the same? Because
No, they don't.
otherwise you have to guess what mode they're using.
So that one is MSK144.
Okay.
Right, let's try
That was obvious, though.
So this is MSK441.
Much nicer.
That was actually a 2 metre one as well. So all you do to set the calling channel up again is see this button here. You click that and you make sure if you tune your radio to the receive channel that you want, that should be the last 3 digits of the frequency there. So I'm on 291 on the radio. You click the button and basically it's transmitting on 280. Now on this program, the radio frequency doesn't change when it's transmitting. It's just the receive frequency, so you won't see it. But basically, you can, and the message that goes out is basically you go CQ and then the offset, and then your call sign. That's the only difference between FT8 and Meteor scatter.
So if you reply to somebody, you don't have to worry about the offset, the software.
You just click on it, yeah. And I'll just show you. I think I've got a couple more files. And this is the sort of reply you get. That's a hell of one. Look, that was a big meteor, or a bunch of meteors. So you can actually see, you'll actually get multiple decodes here, and you can also see this is the frequency offset. So there's a little bit of Doppler creeping in around there. But you see there's 4. And you were talking about the signal strengths, they're quite big.
At what point is it considered that you've made the QFO?
So basically, once you've sent, so if I go back with a signal report, he goes back with a receive 00, I go back with a 73s.
Oh, so it's the same sort of thing as with FT8.
Yeah, no,
just
you don't.
taking longer to.
Yes, I think, and what I do is I send this 3 or 4 times and then I stop.
Yeah.
And then if I see him coming back to me again, then I send it again. Alright. I mean, I basically do it 3 or 4 times, assume he's got it, if I haven't heard anything from him. Right. Some of the Europeans are quite, they'll send this and they won't even bother waiting for this.
And some won't log the QSL unless you get the 73 back either.
And some won't log it till they get the 73 back. So it's all a bit of a mishmash. Not much else to say about it really. Let me just show you FSK, because
Has anyone automated this yet, like the FT8 stuff, so you just leave it on and see what magic has worked?
The FT8, this program has got automated FT8 in it. So I'll show that in a minute. Let me just change the mode to, it's not the transmitter. Change the mode, come on.
Sorry, Viv, I might have missed this, but if you were in MSK 144 and someone happened to be transmitting 441, how would you know?
You don't, unless you can recognise it.
So, would you see something in there at all that might indicate?
Decode it. You wouldn't decode it.
It just
Well, no, it
basically
wouldn't
doesn't decode it.
absolutely. It wouldn't show anything on the waterfall at all.
No. Come on.
So I wonder with all this processing power, it's just not decoding everything all the time, and it can hear and just tell you what it finds.
Oh, got into sequence.
I don't.
But the CPU is completely on it.
Could be a market there, James.
It might be a record on
DST log, what's those
Let's
times?
just start again.
Get a decoding
How
FTA
long did that
detector.
take? About 5 minutes? Yeah, fine.
You face the wrath of Joe and crew.
Yeah, I mean this is one of the problems with MSHV. He's done things that Joe and his crew do not want to have done.
That automation, I'm guessing.
I'll show you that before the last thing, just so you can see it. So FSK, this is much more. What's the word I want? It's free form basically. You get a load of. So message is exactly the same, but if you look along here, you get a load of junk. Some of it's correct, some of it isn't. So this is a really good decode because it's quite a big signal strength. But you can, if I just do that, you can see as you move you do get a load of junk. And this is a very good decode, by the way. If you've got a decode like this, you'd be really pleased. Let's see if I can show you another one actually. So that's another one. Up from that one up there. So there's a CQ. There's probably a call sign in there. It might be again a pretty good one. So you get just load of rubbish sometimes. I mean basically it's an art. Let me try another one.
That's actually an American station.
It is because I haven't got any of these that I've recorded myself. But you get the idea. You basically it decodes what it sees. If it sees enough of the signal, you get a good decode. If it doesn't, you then get rubbish. I believe it's working so well. Yeah, I mean that's a little bit of you start getting rubbish coming in. And like I said, most people go back with 26. You can let it sort itself out basically. And that's really all there is to it. That's all there is to it. So my message is, get on 6 meters, point your antenna where it is east, fire up WSJT or MSHV and see what you get. Whatever antenna you've got. If you're getting out on FT8, you will probably get something. The period's coming up.
In this case, Ian, how does the software know that it's got a complete or even accurate call sign?
It doesn't.
No, you've got to tell it.
This is one of the problems with this, because you can get a call sign and you can get a 26 or an R26 come up,
Yeah.
which could just be a duff decode. You know, if you get a really rubbishy long call, you get a whole load of rubbish in here. So because there's single characters give you an R26 or 26 or 73, you don't know. So it's a real. That's why I think one of the reasons the Europeans like it is because if you get enough of these partial decodes, you can actually think you can put a message together. Now, how good or bad it is, I don't know. All I know is if I get a message, a decode on MSK144, I'm pretty sure it's dead right and I've received the signal. On this, yeah, maybe.
How would you log this? Would you electronic log it?
Yeah, you just click on the call signs and exactly the same as before. So I think I could probably do it if I can find a call sign.
But if the call sign is,
Doesn't exist.
yes, exactly.
Well, it
If
doesn't.
the
Yeah,
call
you
sign's a bit of a mishmash, and you picked it up from 3 or 4 takes,
You
you've
just-
got to then edit the call sign.
you edit it and put it
Yeah.
in manually and do it.
Yeah.
Now the other, so if I move on and just talk a little bit about this program. When you get this program and you download it, if you're going to use it for FT8, there's one thing you must absolutely do. And I'll just show you that now. Under options, you'll see there is, I shouldn't have done that, should I? It's gone. See this box here, use default DX tolerance for FT. What this program does is if you don't do that, it doesn't decode the whole of the bandwidth of the SSB. So it decodes a little bit of it. So what you could do, if I untick that, see this box here? See the green line at the top? You see this, it only decodes in the green line. So it's good if you've got a particular HF, if you've got a busy HF band, you could just go and take a little bit of it so you can handle it. The other thing that it does as well, let's click the other box. Did I click the other box? Other options.
This is the software that some of the expeditions were using, but instead of.
Yeah. So you can click. If you click, so I'm going to show you actually. Haven't I? If you click this box here, under options, other options, and down the bottom here, there's a multi-answering auto-sequencing proton standard FT8 Q65, and then one above is for the expeditions. If you click that one, basically puts it into automatic mode. So you then have these three boxes here instead of your calls. So you have basically one for the settings, one for what you're actually working, and one for the queue. So the queue is easy. If you put a CQ out and 6 people answer you, it puts 6 people in the queue and work through them, one after the other. But now is the one that you're working. This is the settings. So basically you can set the number of queue, the length of the queue you want. So if you get, I've got it set to 5. Realistically, more than about 2 is just too many because people don't hang around waiting for you. TX slots, so you can actually transmit on more than one slot. So if you set this to 2 or 3, you're actually transmitting 2 or 3 TX slots, so you can transmit a load of different stations.
That's what the DX expeditions will do.
And this one is quite important. This is the maximum time. So this is the maximum time on one message. So if you get stuck on a message because the guy doesn't answer and all that, it sends it for 2 minutes. Then there's no duplicates, so it won't answer duplicates. I can't remember what that one is actually. It will auto sort them to make the best choice based on distance for you. And then this box is really the one that makes it automatic. QC on a 3 slot. So if you're not doing anything, not talking to anybody, it goes into CQ mode. And that's basically what you put in your CQ. So if you basically do that, click go, this will sit here CQing and answering stuff.
And then go and get a cup of tea.
Well, forever, basically. It only works on FT8 and FT4. But yeah,
And that's the bit that Joe doesn't like.
then Joe doesn't like this bit at all.
Because
Cheating.
Well, it's cheating. It goes against everything, doesn't it? It really does.
Yeah, unattended operation.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't agree with that.
You're sitting soldering up something that's on the bench.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're there.
There's lots of different options
Yeah,
on this.
People don't use it like that.
No, of course not. You've got to work in the day.
I could name a couple of stations that I see on FT8 and they are on 24 hours a day. And quite clearly, there's
That's extreme.
yeah.
So it's also got a load of filters in it, so you can actually hide messages and not work to messages from various contacts. You can put in what you want to, what you don't want to see. You can show messages only in those countries. You can, what's this one? With DX prefix and so and so.
V5.
There's a whole load of them basically you can apply, and then it basically if you use it on not too useful on VHF and UHF, but on HF you can just basically.
There's an interesting call at the bottom there that anybody who's been around a long time will know. G8JVN. Anybody recognise that?
Richard.
You should recognise it, shouldn't you? Yeah. Richard.
Yeah, Richard, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of history there.
Yeah, he used to work on
Version of JTX. Does this follow suit, or does it take is there a lag?
No, this follows suit quite quickly within almost a few days, probably a few weeks at the minimum. I mean, last time when they brought out Q65, what he did was he actually released it before Joe had released it. So you know, it wasn't the right thing to do. So of course it upset them. So he's on the ball, and you get it pretty quickly. I mean, I use this all the time. Oh, the other thing that's good about this that I love is the logging. Because basically, you know, on WSJT, logging is horrible. You can't really see what you're doing. You basically get a nice log. You feel is you get the stations, start and end time, locator, distance, the mode, the bed. So anytime you
just a string.
You can shoot anytime you can. I basically run that on one screen and this on another screen, so I can see what I've worked.
Did you get it put straight into your main log?
I don't log after that. I just send these off to the competition, save them, and and if I'm doing just ad hoc stuff, I occasionally feed it up to QRZCQ. I don't really keep a log.
Is there any lookup facility if you want to look up like on
Yeah, you get-
WJTX, I have not like an automatic lookup so I can see who the station is?
So if you just see, I can show you that actually. What you can do, what have I got selected? FT8. And if I've got a file on FT8. I have another one. Node. On FT8, when you do that, when you right click on it, you actually get the country code, the country it's from and everything, so you can tell.
It's got
Look up button down the bottom there.
It's also got a look up button down the bottom, yeah.
Oh, right.
And it fills it in as well, where it came from. Remembered it.
Excellent.
So have a go. 6 metres, whatever error you've got, leave it running.
That side of it's okay, it's just the RF side.
So, questions?
Takeoff angles?
Just pointing. I mean, these ones, I did with my aerial down, pointing through into the roof. I mean, literally my 5 element was down below roof level, pointing straight up into the roof. So it wasn't high, it wasn't at 10 metres or anything at all. And you can see they're quite good. They're quite good signal strength. You really don't need much at all to get a signal back.
If you've got 7 hours.
Yeah, sorry. Is there a website that shows when the showers are that you can use for a reference?
Yeah, there's lots
Yeah,
of
just look them up. Yeah.
just look them up. But I mean, basically, December and January are quite good.
The end of July, August.
Over to July and August, yeah. The December, January ones are the biggest shouts. Found that interesting?
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Phil.
You're welcome.